Hello, my name is Tony Carnes. I'm your host for A Journey Through NYC Religions Television. Welcome. My producer woke me up this morning and said, we have a New Yorker who is in Rangoon, Burma, or Myanmar, as it's officially called, that it can tell us what is going on in Burma. In this state, there have been a crackdown by the socialist military, and who has killed hundreds of people and threw out the legitimate democratically elected government. We are having to do this interview, if we can get a hold of him momentarily, without picture of him, and I'm going to call him a journalist because we need to anonymize his biography, and we will also slightly alter the voice. Hello, journalist, are you there?
Yes, hello, I am.
And by the way, what time is it at your time right now?
Right now it's 10:26 p.m.
Was there any conflict today in the capital?
Yes, the conflict here and throughout the entire country. The Chinese troops have been brought in by the socialists here.
How many troops were brought in? Do you know?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you quite well.
Okay. They made very clear that most of the people who were being killed by the government, the people whom the government will be killing, will be shot in the head. And even a fake monk came on television, who is the Generalissimo's spiritual advisor. He's not a real monk. Said specifically for the general to win this war, he would have to shoot for the head. And what that turned out to be is that these people are being, even children, about 40 have already been killed, 500 people altogether, and these are unarmed, peaceful protesters.
New York City produces terrific journalists, great journalists. The best of them have a rich variety of rich experiences here in New York City. One such journalist is Charlie Wiley. And along the way, he met quite a few and interviewed quite a few significant religious actors. But I do know that one significant religious leader in New York City that you interviewed and followed from the very beginning was Malcolm X. Can you tell us a little bit how Malcolm X came on your radar? And then how did you make your first contact with him?
He was on my radar because I used to read the Amsterdam News regularly, and he suddenly appeared on there. There were articles about him, and then he wrote a column. And so I got to know quite a bit about him, and I was fascinated by him because of some of the stories about his incredible leadership and the loyalty of people to him. And so I called him. I was
New York
in
City
Queens at the
produces
time,
terrific
and
journalists.
I was in my
journalists.
living room at home.
The best of
my
them
wife
have a
on the other
rich
side of the
variety
room.
of rich
And I
experiences
called, and
here in
he
New York
answered the
City.
phone. And
One such
I
journalist
said,
is Charlie
Minister
Wiley.
Malcolm.
Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
how Malcolm
And
X
I said,
came on
well,
your
hi,
radar?
I'm Charlie Wiley, and I
how did you
sure
make your
like
first
to
contact with him?
get an interview. He
And
was
he
on my
said,
radar because I used to read the after that,
Amsterdam
I kept
News
talking
regularly.
and he kept not answering. And this went on for about 5 minutes with my asking questions and saying, well, and finally I said, well, I guess we can't get together. And he said, no, I guess we can't. And I said, well, maybe you could answer some questions for me. And there was silence. And then I'd answer a question and there'd be a one-word answer, which was really no answer. So finally, after about, 5 minutes of this, I said, well, it looks like we're not going to get very far with this. And he said, I guess we're not. And then and remember, up to this point, just as nice, quiet, calm. And I said, well, I'm just trying to do my job. And he said, I'm sure you are, which was his way of saying he thought I was with the FBI or some police department. And then I said, well, goodbye. Now, I can't really do a job of what happened next. Now, remember, this was a calm voice, very, very nice to me. And I said, well, goodbye. And then there was a pause. And then the voice came on and said, goodbye, Mr. Lucifer.
So you started talking to him after he made his break in 64.
My final meeting with him was fascinating. I was on the phone, and at that point in the game, he was on a 30-day death sentence from the Black Muslims. The word was out in the Black community that he'd be dead in 30 days. And I wanted to meet with him one more time, and I figured they'd probably get him. So we set up a meeting, and we met with him at 2 o'clock, and after the lunchtime and before the evening crowd, when the place would be empty. So we got there, and we had an absolutely empty diner, and we could sit any place we want. So we took the farthest to the back booth, and we both sat down on the side with our backs to the wall and looking out. And so he came walking in after a couple minutes after 2. He left his bodyguards outside, and he came in alone. Now remember, here's an empty restaurant. You can sit any place you want. And he came over, and instead of sitting across from us, he sat down with us. So there we were, the three of us sitting 3 across, each one with obviously with our back to the wall.
Were you thinking, will they get me while they're shooting at him?
Well, as it turned out, they didn't actually get him on the 30 days. I don't think they got him for another month or 2 after that.
We are still trying to figure out, what do the presidential election results in 2020 mean for New York City? We are nonpartisan, non-sectarian, so we don't have any opinion about the winner or losers. Did you know that there was a substantial shift toward Trump among the immigrant, Latino, and African-American voters of New York City? According to the New York Times, in the immigrant and Latino areas of the city, particularly, the shift from Democrats to Republicans was 15 to 35 percentage points from the 2016 vote. Wow, that's stunning. Of course, the Democrats are so dominant here that Biden still won easily. Another interesting fact was that when we checked last fall, Trump got more donations per capita in the Bronx than did Biden. What is going on? So we reached out to somebody that perhaps the most prominent and vocal supporter of Donald Trump in New York City. That's Eric Metaxas. Welcome to the show, Eric.
That is the weirdest introduction, Tony. I'm like, I'm speechless. What do I say? It's like, that certainly couldn't be true, but I'm going to go with it. Since I've known you for so many years, anything you say, I know you fact checked it, but I feel I'm speechless.
Well, you'll find at a journey, we get the story before anybody else, and it turns out to be true.
Listen, I know, I don't doubt you. It's just kind of funny to be introduced that way, but it's only because I'm nonplussed, not because it's maybe not true. When you talk about the immigrant thing, that's where I'm coming from. And
that's right.
It's puzzled me. I've come to terms with this, but it took me time to figure out why I feel the way I do, or why I've turned around on certain things. As you know, I went to Yale University. I live in Manhattan. I'm part of a certain world, but I grew up in Queens, among the immigrant community. My dad came from Greece. My mom came from Germany. They met in an English class here in Manhattan. And so I grew up among working class immigrants, which does give me a really dramatically different perspective. And I kind of feel that that can help people make sense of why I would think the way I do on a lot of things. And obviously we're going to talk about my book, If You Can Keep It, but that is, I'm sorry, I keep saying that. My book is called Fish Out of Water, A Search for the Meaning of Life. But it really is about the immigrant experience. I know that's why you introduced things the way you did. But I do think that that's really important, especially for New York. So thanks for bringing that up.
Hello, journeyers. My name is Tony Carnes, your host for A Journey Through NYC Religions Television. All of New York is filled with fascinating neighborhoods, fascinating people in those neighborhoods. And it's also, every neighborhood has a pomegranate of people on spiritual paths. And we are joined by a man that grew up in Belmont, Bronx, and took a path that took him through acquaintances with 6 popes. Monsignor Hilary Franco. Monsignor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am a kid from the Bronx, so let's not forget. I'll never forget when I entered a deli in the Bronx not long ago, and the man looked at me and he said, "Father, don't forget, there are only 2 places in the world, the Vatican and the Bronx."
Fascinating byways. And I'm taking you through some of the one that's probably not the biggest headlines, but they tell a little bit about yourself and why you're such a cool guy in the Catholic Church, you know. And I also know that when you got to Rome, to Vatican, you were doing some graduate work and seminary work. You also you also sang at Christmas, on the Christmas Mass, or at Christmas they would sing.
I belonged to the choir, of the seminary. So I had the beautiful, I guess at that time, but even now, I could, sing a little bit, and I love to sing. About an hour before liturgy, we would really practice the Gregorian chant. And most of the liturgical hymns that I remember, they're all in Gregoriano. That's all it was, the Gregorian chant. And they are so beautiful. They are so meaningful.
And you remember some of this?
I certainly I do.
Could you share a little bit with us right here? Because I love them.
Ave Regina Celorum, Ave Domina Angelorum, Salve Radix, Salve Porta, Ex qua mundo lux extorta, Gaude Virgo gloriosa, Super omnes speciosa, Vale o valde decora, Et pro nobis Christum ex ora.
Today we have Gary Krupp with us, who has come up with some information that's going to change our understanding of what happened during World War II with Hitler, the Catholic Church, and the Allies. Is that we have this story that has been around for at least 40, 50 years, that the Pope during World War II, the Vatican, in other words, the official Catholic Church, stood by and was silent about the murder of the Jews in Rome and Germany, and also took a neutral stand between the Allies and Hitler and said, we're just going to wait this out and not do anything. And this was, I guess, an understanding of a lot of people. And yet you're now saying that understanding is all wrong. How did we ever get that understanding? And
well, we understand.
What kind of impact does it have?
Hold it. Let me explain. Now, part of what you say is true. they were neutral during the war. Now, why were they neutral during the war? Their neutrality enabled them to have a certain protection. For example, in Italy, they had properties from the Holy See that the Germans could not enter. And the Vatican and under the pontificate of Pius XII saved what historians who lived through the war, Pinchas Lapida, for one, who was an Israeli ambassador, said that the Vatican saved almost 847,000 Jewish lives. Do you know how much that is today? That's 25% of all the Jews in the world who are alive today because of the actions of the Vatican. There are only 16 million Jews in the world. It's 0.2% of the world's population. So the point is that what you say, they were neutral. Yes, they were neutral, but they used the neutrality to save people.
As we transition out of COVID, hopefully, religious organizations are returning to in-person worship. Also, many of the great generation of religious leaders after the 1980s are beginning to transition out of leadership and bring in new leaders. And we are in the midst of an intense mayoral campaign to succeed Mayor de Blasio. What is going to happen after our COVID moment? What kind of leaders do we need for the post-pandemic city? What kind of leaders do we need in our religious organizations, our churches, our synagogues, our mosques? We're getting quite a bit of transition, and we need to be thinking about those questions. To help us answer these questions, we've asked Aaron Wren, a notable urban analyst, to come help us answer them. What kind of leader do we need, and what kind are we likely to get? I see all types of stresses going on in the after COVID and after the woke generations coming on. What kind of leader do we need, and what kind are we likely to get?
Yes, well, I would say we have not gotten the caliber of leader that we deserve in America. So we haven't had the leadership that we deserve. When I think about leadership of institutions, of governments, of churches, I think about it there's three real dimensions that I look at it. One is, which I say it's about managing for long-term institutional credibility. And so the three things that I say are, one, it's about integrity, and then it's about competence, and then it's about kind of missional integrity. So,
hello, journeyers. I'm Tony Carnes, your host for this journey through New York City's religions. This morning, we have a conversation with Max Mclean, an actor widely known for his rich voice in the podcast Listener's Bible and inspiring presentations of C.S. Lewis's books. The Wall Street Journal has called his stage presentation of C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters wickedly witty, a one hell of a show. The New York Times calls his current play, C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, infinitely thought-provoking, consistently intriguing. As an avid dramatic producer, Max Mclean is also the founder of the Fellowship for the Performing Arts. This November will mark the debut of the full-length movie on the spiritual transformation of C.S. Lewis, the author of the Narnia Tales. Max wrote the dramatic play upon which the movie script is based and plays a mature C.S. Lewis looking back upon his journey to conversion to Christianity. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be with you. Hitting bottom has all sorts of forms. In my case, it was just this malaise, of life not going anywhere, or almost being rather listless, or going from being super ambitious for the wrong things to being listless and kind of going back and forth. So I think what Christ did was he sort of ordered my loves and ordered my objectives, and realized that I was loved, and that God had a purpose for me.
Now, at that time, I don't think you really knew much about Lewis. He didn't play a
Well,
role.
Lewis came shortly thereafter.
Oh, really?
I remember, I mean, somebody gave me a copy of Surprised by Joy. And, because it was about his conversion story. I was 23, just converted. I think I had read the New Testament. I'd read The Brothers Karamazov, which, by the way, is probably the greatest Christian novel ever written. But that was really my history. I think somebody tried to give me a John Stott book, which was a little too dry for me at that time. But then gave me this Lewis book, Surprised by Joy. And I read it from cover to cover. I think it went by me like a freight train. I didn't know what he was talking about. And so then that person said, well, try this one. So they gave me the Screw Tape Letters. And I said, I know this guy. This guy.
Oh,
I
and
know.
when you play him, it seems like you inhabit him.
I mean, there's no doubt that the insight Lewis has about spiritual warfare from a demon perspective is so real. And of course, he's being so transparent, right? He's talking about his own experience.
Can you give us a little Screw Tape this morning?
Your affectionate Uncle Screw Tape.
Yeah, it's a fantastic portrayal you have.
Thank you.
Today, we have Reverend Rich Velotis with us, who's going to talk about his new book, The Deeply Formed Life. Now, your book, The Deeply Formed Life, is sharing a lot about yourself and how you have arrived at a way of dealing with those things that you have. And if I can skip through some of the central core of the emotions you are dealing with in the book is a fear, anger, shame, and maybe the thing that is mentioned over and over, maybe is the central part of your emotional life, but I'm not quite sure, and I want to ask you, is anxiety. What do you see the center of your emotional life that you deal with most often and that you're being released from?
It's a great question, Tony. And in terms of that, I think it would be anxiety. And anxiety is this kind of automatic response to a threat, whether it is real or imagined. And anxiety doesn't necessarily be as expressed in fear or timidity. Sometimes it is expressed in anger. Sometimes it's expressed in a need to control, manipulation, overworking. So anxiety has many different expressions, but it's often this automatic way of responding to a threat, whether real or imagined. And so that's kind of one of the go-to areas that I've received much help from over the years in trying to be a non-anxious presence in the world. And I realized I had been going through a time period of monitoring my own reactions. And I had developed a 5-step process that I have heard some things here and there, and I just synthesized it into this. These are 5 questions I ask myself whenever anxiety comes or disproportionate response to something happens. And it is this. Question 1, what happened? Question 2, what am I feeling? Question 3, what's the story I'm telling myself? Question 4, what's the gospel say? Question 5, what's the counter-instinctual act that's required of me? And very simply, this is how it worked through. What happened? A well-known leader criticized me. What am I feeling? Deep shame. What's the story I'm telling myself? I'll never be the kind of competent leader I hope to be. What's the gospel say? God has a way of using incompetent leaders. What's the counter-instinctual act that's required? For me, it was letting someone in so that I'm not going into my own journey and my own hole, but letting someone in that I can process with, whether it's my wife, whether it's a trusted friend, whether it's a counselor. And I started doing that process. And I tell you, it's not that I don't go into those holes anymore when criticism comes or difficult conversations are before me, but I don't go as deep as I used to.